Good morning or good afternoon, everybody. We want to thank you very much for attending our webcast today, Best Practices in Forecasting and Capacity Planning. My name is Greg Bailey, and shortly we'll have Randy up as our lead speaker today. A couple of things before we get started. If you do have questions, feel free to ask those into GoToWebinar chat. And then also, if you have questions towards the very end, we'll open the mics up for you to be able to ask questions as well. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off and introduce Randy. Randy is the Managing Director of the Resource Management Institute, acknowledged by industry sources as an expert in global resource management. Randy is the author and innovator of the just-in-time resourcing brand of human capital management solutions. Prior to founding RTM Consulting and the Resource Management Institute, Randy was Senior Vice President, Consulting and Professional Services for Convergys, successfully managing and growing multi-million dollar, $100 million business with 1,600 employees in 31 countries across 6 continents. During Randy's 40-year career, he has worked in numerous other human capital intensive service businesses, including 18 years with IBM, serving IT clients around the globe in a variety of capacities. Randy holds a BS from California Polytechnic State University, San Luis Obispo, California, where he has majored in business administration with a concentration in management information systems. And with that, we're really excited again to have him, and I look forward to turning the session over to Randy.
Perfect. Greg, thank you very much. And welcome. Thank you to Prosimetry and Greg for giving the RMI and myself the opportunity to join you here on this webcast. I'm delighted to talk on a topic that I hope is important to all of you who are joining us today. You know, if you work in a project-based human capital intensive services business, we all know that, you know, finding people, reskilling people, training them, onboarding them takes time, and therefore getting really good at forecasting and capacity planning is essential to our project-based businesses. So, and that is a topic for our discussion today. So I'll move us along. Greg and I, by the way, at the end of our discussions today are going to take some time to take some question and answers from the folks who have joined us here today. So with that, let me, for those of you not familiar with the Resource Management Institute, in a nutshell, we are dedicated to the advancement of resource and workforce management, thought leadership, best practices and standards, and globally recognized credentials in the area of resource and workforce management. And we're helping companies all around the globe with improving project performance, better resource utilization, and making your customers happy, and now also very much focused on a real hot topic in the service-based industries, employee engagement and retention. And so if you go to our website, you'll find a wealth of information. And I don't know if I mentioned it, by the way, joining the RMI is free. You will get access through joining the RMI to market research and white papers that have information on best practice definition in the area of resource management. We offer training and certification programs in resource management, and we participate in events like the one today with Prosimetry. Tomorrow, the RMI is running its own event we call a power-up session on the annual budget process, and we do those on a quarterly basis. We also run an annual conference like the one coming up in October in Dallas, Texas. So anyway, that's a short commercial on who the Resource Management Institute is. So I'm going to talk with you really about just a couple of things as it relates to forecasting and capacity planning. I'll just start off with some perspectives, you know, some of the drivers and things that hopefully will ground us in our thinking as it relates to this really hot topic. And then we're going to share with you some best practices, and those best practices are a result of extensive market research we've done in the space, lots of consulting, and experience from a lot of folks who are in the organization. So that in a nutshell is what we'll be covering. So let me start off with resource management, some perspectives on it. So I always like to start here because I think it's kind of grounds us all in what we all experience as we get up every day. You know, we all have in our project-based world, we have these changing priorities, it's hard to get reliable insight on potential projects when the priorities of the organization tend to shift or change a lot. And project definition, not always precise from a resourcing point of view. And we talk to different organizations who are really good at building project specs before a project starts, and some that are not so good. And I think we all know, if you're on the delivery side of things, whether you're in product development, enterprise IT, or professional consulting services organization, things change, and accuracy in our project definitions is really, really important. Keeping our staffing plan up to date with changes in in-flight projects. So if you're in a product development organization, as an example, you find yourself with, if you're in an agile environment, things move rapidly, things change quickly, priorities change as to what we're developing for whatever those reasons might happen to be. So it's a constantly moving goalpost that keeps us very busy from a resource point of view. And then last is, our project pipeline. Again, whether that's you're in a product development organization or it's those internal IT projects that you're working on, are those projects going to end on time? Will customers or internal demands that cause us to extend those projects? What about in-flight projects? And again, the impacts of things that are happening in an agile world versus those that we're doing in a waterfall environment. So, in the end, there are lots of industry sources that will point to project performance and project failures. And at a Gartner conference I attended not long ago, they cited that 35% of industry projects go off the rails at some level, whether it's related to time, budget, quality, or some combination of those sorts of things. That's also true it's true across the product development space. It's true in enterprise IT, and it's certainly true in professional services. And so at the RMI, we believe that attacking this problem of better resource management, how do I simply get the right person in the right place at the right moment in time, is really fundamental to solving our project performance needs. When we have our own researches, when we got underneath project performance matters in any of those domains I mentioned earlier, is resource management tends to be the biggest driver of project failures, not project management techniques, not quality techniques. Just cut to the quick, resource management is high in the totem pole. So this is an example of some of the research that we do. I just picked this out of a research report that we did last year, and when we asked a simple question, what are the largest inhibitors to effective resource management in your businesses, this is what the audience told us, was that 69% said process design of resource management was a key point of a failure, and then second was I don't have the right automation tool. And we just did some recent research in this area on automation tools and looked at the huge dependency people have on a multitude of tools to do what we conceive of as our view of as one job. So the industry really got a ways to go relative to both process and tool design, so I know Procimetry is working hard at that with what they do with Tempus Resource, and we're certainly working hard at that with what we provide as far as a just-in-time resourcing. And so I'll share it with you another view of that of another research report we did last year too, when we asked those same people, what are you going to go focus on next to try to improve how you're doing in resource management? Number one item that came up was forecasting and capacity planning by a pretty wide margin, as you can see from this particular page. So, there's certainly other things that are getting in the way, relative to their skills inventory and project staffing, and then the automation tool certainly is a point of failure for a lot of organizations. So moving to a more modern automation tool like Tempus Resource as an example, those tools have come a long, long way in their ability to do a better job of resource management. So combining, and we talk about this a lot, is that you can't do this without process, and you can't do it without technology. The two really work hand in hand. So I hope a little bit of that context is helpful to people. So as we start to discuss how we're doing as it relates to what we think are best practice in this area, I'll start off with a solution that I authored a long time ago. It was about a dozen years ago, and it was mirrored after I had extensive background when I started my career as an engineer at IBM. In the manufacturing space, of all things, and the time just-in-time manufacturing had just come into vogue, and manufacturing companies were really struggling with this whole concept of how do I, control disparate inventories, how do I manage my levels of production capacity, and how do I keep demand and supply of those things better in balance. Companies were structuring with them, and along came this new idea called just-in-time manufacturing. And I became very, very familiar with that discipline, and it worked quite well. And today, if you're in a manufacturing space, you pretty much can't be in that business unless you're really good at just-in-time manufacturing, supply chain techniques, and those sorts of things. And we simply took that idea and applied it to human capital. Now, recognizing that we're now talking about people, not parts, and we certainly understand that, but we applied that and came up with these 6 elements that we have been working with clients and now in the Institute for about a dozen years. And there are these 6 key elements, which I'll just highlight as I talk about these. And because forecasting and capacity planning, to be clear, is not done in isolation. There are other supporting processes and technology behind it to make it work well. So there's 6 things that we talk about. One is having a skills inventory. Who do I have? Where are they located? What skills do they have? What competencies? Are they on a project today? When did they roll off? So that kind of information is pretty relevant to your planning as you're thinking about how do I deal with upcoming either a new sprint of a project or a new project's going to start or an extension to a project or whatever it might be. A staffing plan is that good organizations actually have a discipline and a methodology around how do I allocate people to projects, and I've got some thinking behind that so that fits my planning processes. Forecasting, which I'll be talking to you more about today, is as I mentioned, as we all know, human capital doesn't appear overnight. It takes time to get budget for people, to go out and find people, to select the right people. They got to go leave their old job. They got to get on board in the new job. We all know this all takes time, and it usually is not hours and days. It's usually weeks and months. And so therefore, if you can't get good at forecasting, it's really, really hard to ever get good at resource management. And if you're not good at resource management, I'm sure you're struggling with project management, because every place we go, that's the case. That's exactly what we see. Sourcing and development is, if you really have a good view of what my gaps or surpluses are for people 3 or 4 or 5 months out, I can then start thinking about who do I need to retrain, who do I need to hire. Maybe I have surplus and I need to attrit some capacity. Maybe I need to find a third party. But those sorts of things, how do I fill those gaps and or address surpluses? Technology, as I mentioned, so go get yourself a really good tool to automate these processes to help you with particularly forecasting and capacity planning. And so that's really, really important to this. And then governance is like any good process is we measure what we're trying to produce as an outcome and can continuously improving our processes and have some kind of governance to provide accountability and a target to shoot at to improve upon. So that's hopefully kind of sets the stage for 6 things we think you need to do. But today I'm focusing on those 2 green circles I talked about, forecasting and the importance of technology and supporting that process. So if you attended our Resource Management Certified Professional program, you would know that this is a slide right out of the curriculum that we have and we teach as a part of our forecasting capacity planning. We teach this 3-part approach to doing that. And a lot of you I know will recognize these as I talk. You may call them perhaps by different things, but they'll all have a familiar ring as to what they actually are. And so I'll start with on the left-hand side of this page with discussing the annual business plan, where we establish parameters and some initial baseline of planning. This is, the annual budget process, and start thinking about, what does the business look like 12 to 18 months from now? How many people am I going to need? When am I going to need them? Where am I going to need them? What skill sets, how much those people cost? And I got to start thinking about that relative to the projects I have on board, the people I have on board. But these things drive an annual budget plan, and generally it's long range, 6 to 18 months out. It's usually not the thing we're living with in a tactical, but it kind of most companies, particularly public companies, have to put a stake in the ground every fiscal year around where they're going to start. I'm going to jump to the right-hand side of this page and talk about staffing. This is what many of you are doing on a day-to-day basis. I've got projects that are people rolling off. I've got new projects that are starting. I have a project that needs some extra resources, whatever they might happen to be. And so somebody's having to understand the capacity that I have within the organization, and how do I shift and move and allocate those resources to produce the best outcome relative to whatever my project portfolio might happen to be. And then it's sitting here in the middle is what we call the living plan, or our basis for decisions for plan changes from the long range plan to those things that are maybe happen on a daily basis. And it's this whole area of forecasting. And so we think of this as, again, it's a look into the future. It's proactive forward planning. We talk about, as we teach our certification course, assigning probabilities to projects that might start. If you're in PS, a deal we might close. If you're in enterprise IT, an internal budget decision to produce some internal project. If you're in product development, it's some new product that the companies decide to go ahead with. And generally, these things happen over a 1 to 6 month time frame. And what we're trying to do with good forecasting is get good enough at this that we buy ourselves enough time to fill that gap for skills development, onboarding, those sorts of things I talked about earlier, to make sure that we're not in continuous triage as the day-to-day staffing decisions that come up, as opposed to moving from we'd like to see move from a reactive environment to a very proactive environment. And so this is a fire drill every day. And of course, this helps us to do a better job of establishing what our long-range plan really needs to be. So hope that's kind of helpful context, because we think about this whole forecasting thing in that center box and how it fits in that overall view of how we do budgeting and forecasting in a service-based organization. So, at its highest level, resource forecasting is simply about balancing and a continuous balancing of demand and supply. Demand is defined by project or by sprints or by clients, or depending on what your business is. Generally, again, over a 1 to 6 month period of time. And I'll really hit on this because this is a major point of failure. And I'll show you a slide here in a moment to make my point here. But are we really considering all our sources of demand as we are building our view of the future? And then there's this supply forecast. And who are the people that I do have? Do I have external resources I can go to? One of these people rolling off. These certain people are going to get retrained, and those sorts of things. And so I've got this continuous supply forecast that I'm doing. And when I put the two of these together on the same page, I'm able to hopefully continuously support the definition of what actions do we need to take in order to prepare available resources to meet the needs of our demand. And this is this little simple graphic down here. Really helps with, if I kind of look at unassigned demand and assigned demand versus my unassigned and assigned supply, it really kind of helps us to kind of formulate, okay, I either got gaps or I got surpluses, and now I'm in a better position then to start doing something about it, hopefully well in advance of when I'm actually going to get there, so that I can be ready and not find myself where I've got continuous surpluses or gaps. So as I go into showing, I'm going to show you a page specific to best practices in forecasting. I want to talk about really 4 things that are really critical elements of good forecasting. One is just simply data. And we see organizations tend to struggle with, having inaccurate, lack of data integrity for demand and supply stuff. So people really need to attack. Do I really have good, reliable information to count on? Accountability. Who gets up every day and knows that they're going to lose their job, or they're going to not get a promotion, or not going to get a pay raise, or whatever however you assign accountability in your organizations is who owns this in your organization, and that those two need to come together in some kind of an interlock on a continuous basis, because we all know our businesses change, and the pay rate and pace of our services business is really accelerating. So really important we have an interlock. And supporting that interlock process, by the way, so some analysis. Now, we like to pitch this as being a resource management office, a function in your organization, irrespective of what kind of organization you have, is constantly looking at the data and helping to interlock between organizations that are creating demand, where the supply of service-based resources are coming from, and that analysis is continuously helping us define what those actions need to be, so we always keep supply and demand in place. So, okay, so this is just an example. I don't have examples for every domain, but I'll pick product development. I pick product development as an example here. You know, in product development, we know there's a lot of different things that creates demand on our engineering resources when we're doing product development, whether it's the new products we're going to develop. We have a big customer that's going to a lot of these, and so, you know, sales is asking us to tweak something in the product for them. You know, we have regulatory things like, you know, underwriter laboratory or the similar spec for that out of the EUCE. The quality and warranty service asks for something different in the product, manufacturability, and, you know, and of course finance jumps in and says, hey, this guy's costing us too much to make. And so we have all these different inputs and demands on the organization, and are all examples of where demand might be coming from in the organization. And we commonly see this as organizations tend to go after those one or two big things that are creating most of the demand. And yet, when we get underneath where their failures are, it's a failure to acknowledge that there's not just one or two sources of the demand in most cases. This is true too. If I was talking about enterprise IT or professional consulting services, I'd show you a chart with 6 or 7 or 8 different sources of the demand that are typical in most companies. So it's really important we get that right. So when we think about best practices then in managing demand, so I've talked a little bit about, you know, where's that demand coming from? You know, product plans or project plans, or if you're in the PS organization, a CRM report. It's important we identify all of our sources of demand, and that we set some standards and come up with the you know, definitions that we're going to use to describe things. One thing we find as a point of failure organizations is engineering calls it by one name, and yet manufacturing calls the same thing by a different name, and we get confused within our own organization about that. So we see this all the time. So, you know, getting to a common set of standards and report formats really, really important. And that when we do our work on our projects or product plans or whatever it might happen to be, that they be decomposed into project plans that are detailed enough that I actually can put together a credible resource plan, and then some communication mechanism to do that. So, you know, it helps, by the way, to eliminate our incoming requests from unknown groups, you know, asking for unfamiliar roles and skill sets. And so really, really important that we make sure we are, again, tracking and using all sources of demand, and that we should be tracking all of those things that are in flight then, and then acted upon by some, you know, centralized RMO function or whatever you might want to call it. Having a, you know, common understanding of what we call these things, and then setting the ability then to compare this demand picture to our supply. And one of the things I'll do is I talk about then on the supply side is I talked about interlock earlier on a prior slide, and interlock in its simplest terms is getting the stakeholders that matter to your choices on human capital together in some kind of a communicative format to agree on what the future looks like, so that we can agree on budgets and actions, and, you know, HR making choices and helping us with hiring, you know, partner organizations with finding third parties, whatever it might happen to be. But this, by the way, tends to be the hardest thing for organizations to tackle, is getting an interlock process in place where there's accountability up and down the organization to what choices we as an organization are going to make to fulfill our product plans or our client project portfolio, or whatever, you know, you have to support from your delivery point of view. And this, by the way, interlock typically would occur at multiple levels in your organization. So, you know, at the highest level is when it comes to the annual budget plan, we want people on board with that, as well as there's budget choices that are maybe changing from what the annual budget anticipated, right down to those people who are involved with making the day-to-day adjustments to our portfolio staffing mechanisms to make sure our projects run on time. So a few keys to all this is making sure you got reliable data, avoid the you know, we call the shadow forecast, is, you know, things might change. We might close that deal. We might try not to live in the ambiguous world here, push things out of the gray into the black and white areas. Interlock's really, really important. Make sure you got the right people in the room to do this and establish some standards around this. If you tackle this interlock thing, it'll make a huge difference in your ability to solve this resource management problem. So a few more points on interlock. Again, it should occur at multiple levels, from very senior executives down to those people doing the real work on a day-to-day basis. Your design will be unique to you because it depends on how you're organized. But again, the concept of interlock we've seen applicable to any organizational construct. Keep it simple for the participants, even if it means more work for the RMO, is that what you're trying to do is get people to want to participate in the process like anything else. Is make it simple, makes it more inviting. Have the data and distribute it in advance to do this, and make sure that we're always focused on the future, because that's what interlocks are really all about. Now, managing supply. Real important here, obviously, is that I got people on projects, they're rolling off. I got hiring plans. Maybe I got firing plans or attrition plans. I got third parties. Is making sure that the data around these, validate your roll-off dates, monitoring your in-flight projects or sprints, incorporate, plan new hires, onboarding plans, and you got to keep these things updated. This should be moved to a more fluid, a more continuous process, not something we do once a quarter or twice a year. This should be done on a really regular basis. And looking in the future, that's where we really want to get focused in order to do this. And when you do this and do this well, then again, with management, you got your pictures of your supply, you got a manager of, as I showed earlier, of your demand. And then you can put this together and always have a clear view of your gaps or your surpluses. And if you get out far enough out with good forecasting, you can do this in a way that gives you the time to take the right actions you need to take in a human capital intensive business. So in conclusion, and I'll share with you a couple things I hope will be helpful beyond that, is that forecasting really is the difference between being proactive and reactive. And in a human capital intensive business, you cannot afford to not do forecasting well. It is a huge driver of poor project performance when we don't do this. Understand all the drivers of your demand. Make sure you really know where all the demand's coming from your organization. Remember, interlocks are key. Have a cycle to keep your data up to date. Data integrity is really, really important here, and having confirmed data will help you with this. So I'll finish with a brief commercial. I mentioned the certification program. We have a program called the Resource Management Certified Professional Program. It's been in place about 4.5 years. We've had more than 400 companies today who have put people through the Resource Management Certified Professional Program, and it gives you a chance to learn best practices, get access to a special resource center we have through our website, and to collaborate with your industry peers. And hopefully you recognize some of the logos out there. These are some examples, some of the companies that have invested in this. When you go to the program, you can do it in a 3-day on-site course. You can do 6 2-hour sessions online with online instructors, or we now have it in an on-demand format that you can watch from the privacy of your desktop 24/7. There's a certification exam at the end, and there is a recertification process, not too dissimilar from what you would see from the Project Management Institute or other certification organizations. It's $1,895 per person. That's all in, included for your materials and testing fee if you travel. Your travel expenses are on your own. And if you're a PMP, by the way, you can earn PDUs going through our program for your PMI, PMP recertification, in addition to what we have for recertification for our RMCP certification. So, and what we teach is this solution I've talked about called just-in-time resourcing. And the last thing I'll mention before I pass it back to Greg is coming up October 9th and 10th, we are holding our second annual Resource Management Global Symposium in beautiful Dallas, Texas at the Renaissance Hotel. It's a day-and-a-half program with tracks for product development, enterprise IT, professional consulting services. It's $1,149 to participate. We will have a healthy dose of process-intensive topics here, as well as technology vendors. We are proud to say that Pro Symmetry is going to be a sponsor of this year's event, as they were last year. and we have nice growth of this event. So I hope you can join us in Dallas here coming up, and we still have room for you if you're interested in joining. So with that, Greg and I are going to take a Q&A at the end, but I know Greg's got some things he wants to talk with all of you about. I hope this is helpful. With that, Greg, I'm going to send the deck back, the presentation back to you, and we'll go from there.
Sounds terrific. So let me share my screen here. So as Randy mentioned, and he went through quite a bit of different process-oriented slides and some of the key components of having a successful supply demand and doing your capacity planning. I'm just going to go through and spend about 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes, kind of reviewing some options you've got if you want to automate that. What we found is that in many cases, the vast majority of our clients, and there are numerous ones, tend to be using Excel in many cases. So that could be you. I also find in a lot of cases, folks may be using an existing project-oriented system, and they're having a difficult time doing their resource capacity planning or getting resource managers engaged on those kind of tools. So what I want to do is kind of show you some live examples of how it might make it a lot easier for you to be able to get other folks involved or engaged in the process. So let me just walk through this with you, and then I'll open it up for questions at the end with Randy. So a few key things Randy mentioned was, obviously, when we do have our resources that you're going to have in your pool, you will have probably named people, and you'll also have generic resources. So in a lot of cases, you don't know who you're going to put on the project yet, so you're going to assign generic resources until you get the name of the person. Now, one of the key things too is, even if at the very beginning, if you can at least have maybe one attribute about the resource. So if you want to group Rachel by her role or by her skill or by her department or by her manager, you want to be able to capture some of those attributes about that particular resource. Now, typically what we find is that organizations, whether it's IT, engineering, or whatever kind of group it is, when you are setting up your resources, you're going to have some kind of base capacity you set. Now, as Randy mentioned, not all work is project work. So you may also want to be able to track things like admin time, business as usual. Obviously, if folks are doing agile kind of work, you want to be able to have that in here as well. So being able to have what is someone's base capacity, less some of the other non-project oriented stuff, will really give us a good view into when someone's available or not available to be able to assign on projects. Now, what I want to do is I'm going to kind of jump ahead a little bit. I'll talk a little bit about how easy it is to enter data, just like Excel. But really where we really start getting into some strong capability is, and as Randy said, is you've got all these projects that are coming into the pipeline, and you need to be able to know when can you actually execute on those projects. So it's real important to be able to take a look at all of the projects that you've got going on. And what I'm seeing here right now is a whole lot of projects. Some of them are in flight, some of them are in various stages. You've got some that are proposed projects, and down below you can get a really quick view into where you're over or under allocated and where you have open capacity. Now, I happen to look at it by role, but I could have very easily done it by department, manager, skill, or whatever. And obviously I can get down to the named person to see who's over allocated or who has open capacity. A lot of times we'll see folks that also want to look at this more in terms of headcount planning, where they want to know, hey, where, based on all this work that we've got going up here, where are we going to be short FTEs or headcount? Where do we have open capacity, and where can we slot work in? Now, one of the slides that Randy presented was, you've got all this work that's going on here, and now you got to decide, well, how can we execute on it if I'm showing I've got over allocations or shortages? So some of the things that happen, we see quite a bit, is that you like to know, what if this project slips? What's going to be the impact on my resources? So you may want to say, what if this slips? And in real time, show me the impact of that slippage by showing me the allocation before the move and what's the allocation after the move. Before the move and after the move. So it's all about real-time what-if scenario planning. And probably most of you, as you're in your various meetings, whether they're daily, weekly, quarterly, or whatever, people are asking you these questions. What if this project slips? What's going to be the impact of that? Or what if we have to get this project done sooner? Can we do it? And in real time, it's going to let you know if you have to get that project done sooner, here's how you're going to impact your resources. Here's the allocation before, here's the allocation after, and every resource that was impacted by that. Another quite common scenario or use case we run into is that clients will go, hey, I've got all these new projects coming in the pipeline. I need to know if I can do them or when I can do them. So we give you some really nice capability to say, hey, here's some new projects coming up. I need to know when I could slot this one in because I've got to give that answer to the business. So you can ask Tempus, tell me when I can slot it in. It'll give you multiple dates when I can find a place to slot that in where I have 100% of the resources available. Now, obviously, there are some cases where you might be requesting resources and you don't have enough available. Tempus will give you that answer as well. Or you might say, hey, I need to start it way before then. So let's assume I can live with a few less resources because maybe we can hire some folks. So Tempus will tell you, all right, well, you could start it here sooner, and I'll tell you exactly where your gaps are going to be. Someone is specifically looking for analysts, and you're going to be short analysts. But you might say that's okay because I know I'm going to be able to get some contractors in the future to do that. So it allows you to answer that question in real time. When can we start a project? And assume that you're going to start it on that date, and now you can continue to work through your scenario plan or what if model that you might have. I'll give you a few other examples in this what if, and then I'll actually show you some direct entry, how easy it is if you're used to using Excel or some other tool, how easy it is for the users to move over. One of the other scenarios is that in most cases, you might have the need to say, hey, we might be doing 5 more of these, and I need to know how many additional headcount we will need to do that, or what if we are going to do 5 more of these or 4 more of these? Well, we make it really easy for you to be able to go in and say, hey, I think we're going to do, and let me clone this. Let's say we think we're going to do 4 more of these or 5 more of these. They might be a little bigger. Maybe we're going to start them out here, and you want to know, well, can we do that? Quick clone. And again, in real time, Tempus is going to give you the before and after implication of us doing that. What's the allocation before? What's the allocation after? Again, going all the way down to the name person. I'm not necessarily showing you that in all these cases, but it allows you to do this real time what if scenario planning. Last thing I'll show you in here is you have the ability to do a lot of the resource replacing. So one of the big challenges you've got in many cases is that things move fairly quickly in your organizations. So you may want to be able to do things like, hey, I see, for example, Audrey is over allocated here. Well, actually, a lot of my people in the demo database is over allocated. But let's just pick on Audrey, for example. And we say we've got to replace Audrey. Okay, well, who can we replace Audrey with? It'll go out and look for the same folks that have that same skill as Audrey, and then come back and show me who's got availability that could fulfill that slot based on what their current workload is. So I could quickly swap out Audrey for Helen, for example, and say I'm going to apply that change, make that change, and now I can see in real time the impact of that. Now, the benefit of doing it in this what if scenario planning is I'm not actually changing any live data. I'm allowing you to do this what if without impacting live data. So you've got groups that are saying, well, what if we do this? What if we do that? And it's not going to impact that. Full what if in terms of the history of what you've got going on. So at any point in time, you could say, hey, I don't like that last change. Let me undo it and show me the changes. So that's kind of the last I'll show you on this what if scenario planning. There's a whole lot more that we give you the capability to do. But I think this is a good, at least, touch point that if anybody wants follow-up, more detailed demos, we can show you that. The last thing I do want to show you is that in addition to extensive what-if modeling, reporting, and dashboarding, how easy it is for people to enter data when they're doing these assignments. What we found is that if folks are using Excel, and I'm just going to go in and create a quick RMI project here. Let's just go say this thing's going to run from here to here. And maybe at this point, I'm just going to assign generic resources because you don't know who you're going to put on it yet. So you might assign some generic resources. You could also assign named people. So however you all are doing it on this call, you're going to be able to handle either generic or named. Also, the way, if you notice the data entry is, I can either enter by month, week, or day, or I can do it by FTEs. So in this case, I might say I'm going to need 2 analysts from here to here. Some people like entering it in percentage of time, so we're going to let you do that. I need Abigail for 50% of her time. Some people like doing it in hours. I'm going to need, 140 hours of this resource type. So however you're currently doing it, we're going to let you enter that data probably like really close to how you're doing it in Excel today. So very simple, copy and paste, drag and drop at the project level, because in many cases you just are not going to get the engagement down to a really detailed task level, but we do allow you to enter tasks if you have those, or we also allow you the ability to import data from any external system you've got. So if you are using another system, a Jira, ServiceNow, another PPM tool or anything, we have the ability to populate Tempus. So that way you could have high-level resource plans in here, as well as give you the capability to do all of the what-if scenario planning, even if you've got data entered into another system. Last thing I'll show you on this is that we have a lot of folks that some do what I call resource request. So their process might be someone is requesting a resource, whether it's a named or generic, and they want that to flow to the functional manager, whoever the resource manager is. And then that manager is able to go in and say, all right, well, let me go ahead and take a look at the resources that are being requested. And so in this case, I've got one pending one. So I can now say, all right, someone is asking for Colin, and how much time do they want of Colin, either by FTEs, percent, or hours. And they can either say, I'm going to approve that, reject it, or, hey, I can see Colin's not available. I'm going to give that work to Carlos instead. Or assume this is one of those generic resources, an engineer, a system analyst, or whatever. I could then say, instead of system analyst here, let me go see the people that are available that I'm going to give that can do that work. So there is some really nice enterprise resource capacity and workflow capabilities available in Tempus as well. Final thing I'll show you before we open it up for some questions with whatever you'd like with Randy. Obviously, with any kind of enterprise resource capacity tool, you're going to want to be able to have all kinds of executive dashboards and views related to resources. So you're going to want to be able to do things like say, here's my capacity, where am I over allocated, kind of look at where I'm, how my data is looking over the future. And by the way, we can handle not only planned hours, but if you have a need to compare planned versus actual hours, we also have timekeeping capability, or we can pull actuals in from another system that you might have. So very extensive graphics, very extensive reporting around that whole enterprise resource and project portfolio management, but also the data entry makes it super simple for us to be able to do that, as well as being able to have that what if scenario planning. So with that, I just wanted to give you, again, just a really quick view into the fact that we've got very extensive resource capacity what if scenario analysis available, whether you're entering the data directly into Tempus or we're pulling data in from another system. And in fact, as I mentioned, a lot of our clients have Excel. It's very easy to set up trials. We just import that Excel data into the dedicated Azure environment for you to be able to look at that. So with that, what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to have you all, if you can, take a look at the question tab in your GoToWebinar, and then I'm going to see if there's any questions and open it up for Randy to be able to answer anything that may come up. So give it 1 second here. All right. And by the way, if you would prefer to ask a question live, go ahead and click on the, I was going to say raise your hand, option there, but there is a raise your hand option in there that we can go ahead and have you ask the question live if you would prefer to do that. All right, looks like I've got a couple of questions coming up here. So give me 1 second. I'm going to read these. All right. Okay, Randy, it looks like here's the first one that I've got here. All right, I'll see if I can kind of paraphrase this one a little bit. How do you sell the value internally of needed investments in the process support and technology to properly conduct forecasting and capacity planning? And if you need me to make you a presenter while you're explaining that, I could do that as well. But if not, I'll just let you answer.
Yeah, I won't need that. Thank you, Greg. I was going to make a quick comment before I answer the question that as you were going through the demo is when I was talking about the analyzation piece of the Interact process and what the RMO can bring to the table. Greg used a bunch of great examples of taking high integrity data and taking that data and how do you use it to produce some actionable outcome that the business ought to take. And I just wanted to comment on that. That was exactly the kind of point I was trying to make. But back to the question about internal selling, because this is, there's no doubt about it, this is another process for resource management, and it's another tool. Now, you may already have a tool and you may have a process, but these things, like anything else we do in our project-based businesses, to do it right costs money. And organizations that are not used to have spent a lot of money on resource management versus project management and quality management, which is where over the last 30 years, I say the bulk of the spending tended to go, including the automation tools to support those, is resource management now is so many organizations have identified this as, hey, if we had looked at it 30 years ago, we would have started with resource management and worked our way into project management and quality methods as opposed to the other way around. But we are where we are, and getting better resource management is pretty critical. So the way we typically advise organizations to sell this internally is to capture some data relative to how you're doing on project performance, what your resource utilization, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, and compare it to the industry benchmarks, and then just do the math on if I just got as good or better than what the industry is doing on these things, you'll catch people's attention. In most cases, when we have helped an organization that's got utilization issues, as an example, we'll see a 7 to 15% improvement in utilization of the same resources, and at the same time produce better project outcomes, better project performance, and do it at a lower cost with happier customers and happier employees. So there's a lot of ways to quantify this. And so, getting tops down support, you can, like any business, if you can show the finance officer, the HR person, or the CEO or the COO data that says, hey, attacking resource management, which requires us to spend X on process and X on a tool, but here's the improvements we can make in project performance, better utilization. We've never had an issue where I'd just say justifying these things is usually the simplest thing to do, not the hardest. The hardest thing is putting these things all in place and making it all work, like any other new process to a business. But and if you're already doing this, then you can look at it from where I am today, and how much better can I get? And you can go out to our website. You'll see there's a ton of resource management benchmarks from we've got 9 research reports out there. We're going to have a 10th produced here in about a month. And anyway, I hope that helps. So that's Greg. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that was awesome. All right, I've got one other question here. Someone was asking related to the demo, so I'm going to pull this up real quick. The question was, can we look at the data not just in months, but can we get it to a different granularity? And the answer is yes. So I just happened, again, this was obviously a pretty quick demo. I just happened to be just showing that you could look at it in months here, but you could get down to the weeks, do this in weeks, or do it in days if you want to get to that level of detail. And obviously the scenario planning and modeling, you're going to want, you can do that in whatever level you want to. The other thing I would say is that we have a lot of clients where they like to do edits in bulk. So you might actually be editing multiple projects at the same time. So if I go take a look at, don't know, I'll go look at this flat. A lot of people like using a flat table. So in this case, same kind of thing. I'm editing multiple projects. You can choose what project that you want to edit. So if I wanted to edit all these projects, it's going to show me that down below. And then I can either do it, as I mentioned, in days, months, weeks, or hours. I can also do FTEs, FTE%, or hours. So you can make, changes here and actually edit a whole bunch of stuff at one time. All right. All right, so that was a question on being able to do things in other than just months. All right, so let me just pause this real quick just so I can go look at the next question here. Bear with me. All right. All right. So I think the next question really was around how can you get better accuracy when you're doing these estimates, that there's so many different conflicting requests that are coming in. How do we get a better handle on getting those estimates more accurate?
Is that for me, Greg, then?
Yeah, that one's for you.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll have a two-part answer here because it is a one part process and one part technology here. On the process side is, one thing we do see organizations do is struggle, try to get this perfect right out of the gate, and that never happens. Most organizations, struggle with forecasting and getting over that bar of, that you really can't forecast human capital needs 3, 4, 5, 6 months. A lot of organizations are doing it today and doing it pretty accurately. You'll never be perfect at it, but don't expect perfection at the start. So quite key idea is put a stake in the ground, start with a forecast, make sure you go after all the sources of demand that example, you think about anything that drives use of that human capital, whether it's external or internal, but make sure you have that identified. Make sure that you focus on the integrity of that data and how it's being presented to you. And then the interlock process is, let's everybody stare at this. And here's what we're saying the future looks like. Do all the business organizations that are creating this demand agree on that? Because, by the way, the money to pay for those people has got to come from someplace. So somebody's going to have to ante up for the budget. And can HR source all the people in time? Can finance actually fund this, and so on and so forth. But getting that done, and then start to measure that month after month, and continuous improvement. As I said, just don't agonize over getting it right from the gate. Get it done, and then look back a month and say, okay, how much did we miss the mark by? And then every month, continuously try to improve on that. We see organizations, you'll make some big changes early on, first 60, 90, 120 days of this, you'll get a lot better, and then it'll become more iterative, smaller improvements. But that's how it happens. And then on the technology side, again, is that if you're working with a variety of tools, one of the problems is having 3 different spreadsheets and 2 other tools, and you're trying to put the data together. We all know what happens is you have different data sources, and at some place they don't reconcile correctly. You have data integrity issues. So really trying to drive yourself toward a singular planning tool that would help you with this is a better thing, and focus on the data integrity. And if you put that process that I described together with interlock and get the right kind of automated tool to do this, you'll get better at forecasting accuracy, which is absolutely essential, again, to project performance and all the other things I've talked about that drive cost saving, better employee satisfaction. Interesting, one of the things we found is that when you drive to this just-in-time resourcing environment that I described earlier, is employee satisfaction goes up because they find that they live in a much more proactive organization where they know kind of where they're going, how it supports their career aspirations and needs. They have some opportunity to participate perhaps in that process versus a continuous reactive process of okay, I got to shift priorities here. I'm taking you off this project. I'm putting you over here because I'm trying to plug a hole in the dike. And you all been there. If anybody's been a part of or experienced a chaotic environment, moving out of the chaotic environment into a more planned and proactive environment, employees love it. Your customers like it because they get better quality of the things that you do as well. So anyway, that's my thoughts there.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Randy. And I also want to thank everybody else for attending our session today. We're excited that this recording will be available to you online, so you'll get an email just giving you the link to that online. Really appreciate the questions that came in. If you have any additional follow-up you need, let us know. And we look forward to seeing you at the RMI conference coming up in Dallas soon. Talk to you soon. Everybody have a great day. Thank you, Randy.
Yeah, thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. Thank you, everyone.